Good. Welcome to the meeting of the Joint Standards Committee here on Monday, the 14th of May. Just a couple of welcomes. Not only do we have our normal members, I have got some apologies, which I'll go through in a moment. But there are a number of officers that are joining us for the reports that we'll be looking at. So I want to welcome Claire Foyle, who's the Assistant Director for Policy and Strategy. Welcome, Claire. And we've got Helen Whiting, who's Head of HR. Hi. And there are other regular CYC officers and technical support that join us pretty much every week. So they don't need any introduction in that sense. I do have apologies from, just as if by magic, I do have apologies from Councillor Rawlings, and also I have an apology from Rose Mazar, who's one of the independent persons, but I am pleased to welcome Joe Lee as our other independent person who's taken his seat. So thank you for that. So moving on with the agenda, item number 1, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest that are not already on your register of interests? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I shall declare an interest in item 11, monitoring reports on complaints received, as I am party to one of the complaints. Okay,
thank you for that. Any other declarations of interest? No, that's fine. Item number 2, the exclusion of press and public under the rules and regulations that are in your pack there. Just the normal exclusion of press and public when we come to look at the unredacted confidential report of the monitoring officer into complaints that have been received. I believe, looking at the agenda, that's the only thing that we really need to exclude the press and public from. So can I just have a confirmation you're happy for us to do that? Lovely. Thank you very much. Then I'm just, my eyes are kind of squinting a little bit because I have left my glasses behind. So if I misread something and mispronounce it, please don't think that I have an issue. I can't read it. So item number 3, minutes. To approve and sign the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Standards Committee held on the 8th of April. So if you want to have a quick look through those, if you haven't already, does anybody have any comments on them? Any inaccuracies or corrections that you think we need to make? No, they're all fine. So can I just have a show of hands that are happy to approve those? Thank you. I'll sign those at the end of this meeting. And then item number 4, minutes of the subcommittee to approve 2 of the subcommittee hearings that happened on the 18th of April. There was a subcommittee meeting at 1:30 and then there was a subcommittee meeting at 2:45. Again, those that were involved in those subcommittees, are they inaccurate? Yeah. Good. Yeah. And that's on both of them. Are you both for both of those? Okay, so we can just accept those as, yep, that's lovely. I don't have any items of urgent business, which is item number 5, and I don't have any public participation. But just under that particular section, when it talks about webcasting and public meetings, please just be mindful of the fact that we do have confidential papers. Please don't turn to the confidential papers until such times as the webcast has been turned off, because apparently you can zoom in, if you are so minded, you can zoom in onto a pink paper with our very powerful IT cameras at the back, and you can read what may be a confidential item. So please don't look at your confidential papers until such times as we come to look at that item on the agenda. So that brings us on to item number 7, which I'm really pleased to have this. I know it's been a while coming, but I think it's a really important document, particularly in the light of recent complaints that we've had to look at and to deal with. And so this is the Officer Support Protocol. And so I'm going to hand over to the officer. Is that Helen. Thank you, Helen. I know that you and Councillor Lomas and the rest of the team have worked really hard on this. So thank you very much for that, for the report. If you'd like to speak to it, and then I'll open it up for questions. But thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's my first invite to this meeting, so it's a new one on me. So as Chair mentioned, I've summarised the support available because obviously we do have some certain situations where the relationship between officers and members may occasionally break down. And whereas in an employment situation, we have the employment processes, we obviously have the members' code of conduct and then the standards committee to be able to go through. Now, obviously, you all know the standards committee process, which I won't go into in a great deal of detail. But what I have done is looked at what support we've got available from an employee perspective, reassure you that that can still be there for employees when they're going through a process to deal with members and through a standards complaint. And I've outlined those details basically from paragraph 8 and specifically at paragraph 12 in terms of what's available. You've got employee assistance scheme, you've got the line manager support. Obviously the main aim is to cover our employees at all times in terms of the duty of care. So even if there is complaints with members of the public or with members or with other individuals, we've got a duty of care to make sure that our employees are safeguarded at all times and heard, etc. So we do that full wraparound, obviously, with the line manager or a head of service, etc. But there is also other services available. As I mentioned there, the employee assistance programme, which can offer the employee access to 24-hour counselling. There is the occupational health, should it have caused stress, etc. We can deal with that. And obviously the line manager support we can put in place should there actually be a reason to put anything there, whether that be to change a working environment or location, or redirecting members' inquiries on an initial interest. But obviously that's all by agreement with the employee and there's kind of monitoring there. But I would ultimately say the idea is to make sure that we try and build bridges and to actually resolve situations informally. We don't immediately jump to these formal processes. That's certainly not where we're going, but I wanted to give you the full breadth of what could certainly be available there. One aspect that you may not have looked at in the past is about trade unions. So obviously from a trade union perspective, in terms of any internal aspect, employees that are members of trade unions can invite a trade union member, and it may be something that when an employee comes to a standards committee, you may want to extend that to be invite a trade union member should an employee wish, or colleague friend there, because it can sometimes be a daunting experience. So that would be one of my recommendations, Chair, should you wish to actually look at this process, and obviously that's entirely up to you. And that would be the only other procedure that I would say. But I would say that on the whole, we haven't experienced a great deal of issues that have certainly raised to me from that perspective, and there is full support there. And this report was all about just making sure that you know that safeguards are there for our employees should that be needed, and support is available. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Lovely, thank you, and I really appreciate it. I have got one or two, but I want to open it up to members first. So members, if you have any questions, if you just indicate, and I'll come to you. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Helen, for pulling this report together. And obviously, after a previous meeting, I met with Helen and Francis to look at how we can best let the committee know what's happening in terms of support for staff, but also just use it as a chance to sense check. Is everything in place? Does everyone know what's available to them? It's really good that even with such a comprehensive set of support available already, that there are still some recommendations we can make to further improve things. And as you might expect from somebody who is a fervent trade unionist, you know, I'd be really in favour of trade union reps being invited to support employees who are going through this process. In my long experience as a trade union leader, what I've always learned is that trade union reps typically support these processes, make them go more smoothly, find solutions, and give the employee not only the kind of individual one-to-one support, but also the confidence to go through the process. And so I would commend that recommendation to you all.
Thank you. Joe, sorry, forgive me, Joe. Councilman, sorry, I didn't realise that I saw your hand. I'll you first, and then I'll bring Joe in, because I saw Joe's hand go up last. So
I quite agree about the trade union rep, and having somebody to support you going through this sort of thing is very stressful for people. But there's something I think is missing in the paragraph above trade union reps on page 20. It talks about involving violence, aggression, threatening behaviours and verbal abuse are reported. I think that we might consider, and I'm happy to take officers' thoughts on this, if there really is a feeling from the member that they are in any danger or at risk, they can call security. And in the past, that has been done. Now, I didn't see it in here. I may have missed it, but quite honestly, it's all very well reporting it afterwards. But at the time, if that person feels really worried and really concerned for their safety, sending for security is a very quick way of getting somebody else on the scene. And I think that should be there somewhere. Thank you, Chair.
thank you. Did Alan want to come back on either of those, and then I'll bring Joe in?
Absolutely. So obviously it's not always face-to-face contact. It could be via email, etc. But absolutely, that is a protocol that's within the building anyway. So if you have any issues, security can be called. So
Yeah. And thank you, Councillor, for a really, really good point. I'm going to just come to Councillor Fisher in a moment for a supplementary. All I would simply add, and this is a general comment because we experienced it at this committee, if security is called, it has to be a quick response. You know, an individual or a group can't be waiting 5 or 6 minutes to find somebody who will then eventually come. So I think generally we need, and we've already had this conversation as a committee, we just need to ensure that security are available within West offices at a quick response if needed. And so maybe you can kind of take that back. Councillor Fisher, and then I'll come to Joe.
Thank you. I totally support what Councillor Unson has said, and I think we need to be proactive in looking at the situation where this could occur. There was one incident where there was a complaint against an individual who had a history of aggression towards other members and officers, and we actually had members of the security in the room or close to it in case anything happened. As it turned out, they had to remove him from the meeting.
Yeah, I think the police were also involved in that as well, but that's by the by. Councillor Pavlovic, is that supplementary or is it? It's okay. So I'll go to Joe and then to yourself.
It's about the constraints on the exercise of a change and understanding responsibilities. Councillor Obas points out the trade unionists, they're representatively very experienced, but they may not be very experienced. So will it be very clear what the power of the trade union representative is and their responsibilities are in what is a non-standard employment situation? So that's just these are comments. I don't particularly want to answer. I'm just saying that's one side. And then the other one is what the power would be if it starts to go wrong, because theoretically things can go wrong in these circumstances. The power left with the chair of the meeting or the meeting to ask for a representative to withdraw. Now, those are not that I'm objecting and saying it's a bad idea. I'm simply saying what could happen if.
Okay, I'm going to bring Councillor Longston, because I think that's just a reply to that.
Just a reply to that. It specifically says the wording that is used is a right to be accompanied, and that has meaning in law. So that is accompaniment is to attend with somebody, not to act on their behalf, but to attend with them, to give support and advice, to be a second person in the room who hears the same things so that you can discuss it afterwards. It has a specific meaning in law under the Trade Union Liaison Consolidation Act. And so I think, you know, let's not get bogged down in things that don't exist.
Yeah.
Sorry,
thank you.
but that individual trade unionist knows that, because they may not be as experienced as a senior one would be.
So trade union reps have to be trained and they have to be accredited by their trade union to perform that function. So they will know the difference because they have to be accredited by their trade union.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to bring Councillor Pavlik in, but just before we do, whilst on the trade union bit, I think I absolutely support the comments about the trade unions. It may surprise you, but in a previous carnation, generally my life was saved by being a member of a union, and I was so thankful that I had a trade union representative with me in a previous carnation where I had an incident to call on them. So I am absolutely in agreement with that. I guess in terms of context of the joint standards and of the standards process, I just want to have some clarity, really. So the only time that an employee would be asked to appear before this committee or a subcommittee of this committee would be if it was a hearing or an investigation. That would be where the complainant is the member of staff and not the person being complained about. So it's a slightly different dynamic with the trade unions, although I totally accept that you may want a trade union assistance just to ensure that you can, but it's just to give it some context that within the joint standards process, there will never be an occasion where a member of staff will be called to this committee or a subcommittee to give an account of a complaint that's been made, because that's a completely different process, which Helen, you are very much aware of.
Yes, absolutely. That's my understanding, Chair, of what this is about. So
Good,
yeah,
lovely, thank you. But yeah, more than happy for the trade union bit to be in there. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. So Helen, thank you for the report. Excellent. I just want to talk to you about the power dynamic in respect of officers feeling that they can make a complaint. It's a daunting thing, and how do we encourage and support, not support, how do you support and encourage staff to feel that, it's not, for example, career suicide if they make a complaint against an elected member or a member of the executive, and what support is given to them, if it's raised with their line manager, or if it's a line manager, or if they're a manager themselves, with yourselves or with anybody else, about saying, you can do this, and you will be treated fairly, etc., etc. Because I don't think there are many complaints coming from officers against members, but is that because people are too frightened to put complaints in? And that's the crux of my question.
because they aren't coming to us, I would assume not. However, as far as I'm concerned, any relationship, similarly with members of the public, members or employee to employee, you're there to raise concerns. If a concern is raised, it's taken seriously, and we've very much got that culture embedded that if you have a concern, please raise it. And that's what we're saying right from the start. It's about raising it informally, first of all, and taking it forward. If it is serious, no manager should be dampening anything if it is so serious, because that is a serious situation in the first place. It's about awareness. And I think certainly amongst senior managers, this protocol's known. It's part of our employee code of conduct. We know the constitution, etc. So that is promoted. So in terms of saying that power struggle, people may be feeling a little bit, I don't know, a bit intrepid about doing it. However, they will be told that they are supported with their manager. They are supported should they be able to bring an accompaniment with the trade union, etc. And picking up on what Councillor Rumsden said about that support from trade unions is really important there as well, that it's actually a protected environment. It's not somebody going to sit there and say, oh, well, you've brought this, it is there. And if they understand it's a formal process, that's obviously a reassurance as well. Why else would other people take forward grievances? They know it's going to be listened to, it's going to be a supported environment if they know that's the case. So I don't think it's an issue. But obviously, if we hear it's an issue, we will address it. But the procedures are all there. That's all available. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It does. It's just that it was a more sort of general point that
Sure.
it is intimidating taking out a complaint or a grievance against when there is a very clear sense of a power dynamic. I don't think necessarily that's borne out in reality, but there is that sense that you don't complain against members, for example.
But similarly, people may think that you don't complain about senior managers.
No.
So
No,
it's
exactly.
a very, very similar dynamic
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of raising it either
Yeah.
as your manager or your next manager.
Yeah.
So
Good.
it would be the similar kind of thing in terms of the culture.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? There's a couple of things I want to just have a chat about, if that's okay. In the modern world that we live in, it's a very scary world that we live in, but one man's banter is another man's burden. And very often things can be played as being banter or just, just comments that aren't meant to be taken seriously. I think every comment that offends should be taken seriously, whether it's banter or not. So I think the purpose behind the comment or the reason behind the comment shouldn't define whether it's offensive or not. That's something I tell my boys that work for me on a daily basis, who are of that age where they think banter is acceptable, and in certain circumstances it is. But in terms of kind of the complaints process, and again, I don't want to refer to individuals, but I know in the past we've had a situation where a member of the of staff felt that the way in which they've been spoken to was inappropriate, raised it with their line manager, which was the right way to go, and then when the line manager tried to address it, also had the same level of almost of aggression and an unacceptable tone, and so therefore there were effectively two complaints that came through. So I'm encouraged that this document is here. I'm encouraged that it's clearly laid out. So there's a couple of questions for yourself, Helen, with regards to this before I go to members to talk about the next step. So the process would still be, and forgive me if I've misread it, so the process would still be for an individual member of staff, if they felt that there'd been an issue that they were unhappy with in terms of the way in which they'd been dealt with by a member, they would still go to their line manager in the first instance, and then the line manager would either try and resolve it, and if the line manager couldn't resolve it, would then advise and help the employee should they wish to go down the formal. So so in a sense that's not changed. Am I right?
I'm not proposing any changes
No,
in that
so that's
respect.
brilliant.
It's absolutely fine, but it doesn't have to be the line manager. It can be anybody.
Okay,
that they need,
yeah,
that
no, I
they
get
can go
that.
to
Yeah.
exactly the same way as
Good.
a grievance. It's about raising it. Some people raise grievances to HR. From this point of view, they might raise it with legal or democratic
I'm with you.
in terms
Yeah.
of that. But it's about raising it. It's escalating
That's the important, and thank
Yeah.
you so much for that. And again, where an informal resolution can take place without it coming down the formal route, that's always a better way forward. But I accept that where we have this committee, because that can't always be the way forward. My other question about the report, which again I just would just endorse, is how has this been cascaded to staff? So if I spoke to Bob in finance, would he know what this process is? So are we confident that it's being cascaded properly?
I'm confident that they know the support that's available to them.
Brilliant.
Absolutely, because that is reinforced. We do lots of regular wellbeing updates, monthly updates, if not every single time. So people know these things trot off our tongue in terms of what support's available for them. If someone says, how do you raise a complaint about a member? You might get a few scratched heads, but they would go automatically because the default is go to your manager.
Yeah.
And then that would, and yes, managers do know that process.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much. I neglected to thank Frances for her contribution to this, so I'll correct that now and thank Frances for her contribution to it as well. Please do, Helen. Yes, absolutely.
Just picking up on Joe's point in terms of the trade union and knowledge of the process, etc. I mean, one recommendation that you might want to consider is making sure that if you know that a trade union is going to be accompanying anybody, just to go through the process, which I think you would do with any individual anyway.
Yeah.
But just to make them very aware of the difference between an employment hearing and a standards hearing would be potentially a good recommendation.
Yeah. I like.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that in mind, members, we come to the recommendations. So there are a number of recommendations to us, and just so you're aware, we don't have as a committee, we don't have the authority to accept any kind of constitutional changes. They do need to go to full council. So in terms of the recommendations that have come to us, I think it is important that we escalate these. And so my suggestion would be that we escalate them to full council, and whether we do that through ANG, if that's probably would that be the best way forward, or through because is the Constitutional Review Committee still sitting, or has that done its time now? Thank you. So whether it's, I think we need to pass these recommendations to somebody who can put it together. So whether it's ANG or whether it's Constitutional Review Committee, that's what I recommend that we do. So anybody have any comments around that? Otherwise, we'll just simply ask for an approval that that's the path that we take. So lovely. Thank you very much, members. And again, Helen, genuinely thank you. Thank you for coming to speak to us. We are a very warm committee, so hopefully you've enjoyed your time with us, and we'll let you go and do other more important things now with your time. But thank you for being with us. Which brings us on to item number 8. Which is on page 41 of your packs, and this is member induction. And Claire, I am pretty sure that this is the one that you're speaking to. So thank you very much for being with us, and hopefully your experience will be just as warm and just as welcoming.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So I brought the member induction review of the programme here today. The programme itself was also reviewed at Joint Standards Committee on the 21st of November. And there hasn't been a huge amount of change, and I'll just talk you through what the changes are. So as one of the annexes, you had the programme itself. You've got a review of the attendance in Annex B, and I'll run through that shortly. You've also got an email as Annex C, which is when we promoted the programme to elected members in October, and then in November, following this Joint Standards Committee group whips, we promoted the programme to leaders and group whips to encourage additional attendance. Just to remind you, attendance can be online, so it didn't have to be in person. People could view, elected members could view the sessions online. You'll see in Annex B that attendance has been variable. And anyone that's sort of totted up the number of elected members that have attended the different sessions, you'll see that there are only 39 listed. That's because 8 members haven't attended any training, so they are obviously not on the form of who's attended what. I can run through the numbers if you want me to as the grand totals, because they were knocked off your actual sheet. But in total, there were 306 sessions attended altogether, with varying numbers of attendance ranging from 4 for antisocial behaviour and right up to 19 here for introduction to scrutiny. So a variable number of attendances depending on the session itself.
Apologise. I have fallen foul of my own rules there. Forgive me.
No problem. You'll also see feedback from members is listed. So throughout the course of the programme, we invited members to provide feedback. And that can be grouped in mostly around how to get onto the programme. So some of the difficulties around using different devices and attending online sessions at the early stages. Clear feedback at the beginning as well. The sessions were too close in the programme, so we spread them out over a longer period of time to spread them more evenly over the year. But also compliments, I guess, from members who commented that the video sessions were really helpful. And although it doesn't show it on the attendance, I know some members, because they've told me so, not only attended in person, but they also then watched it back later on video just to catch anything they'd missed. And then finally, on paragraph 14, you can see the number of different sessions that we've identified as an officer group that we think we need to look at delivering over the next few months. It's worth noting that right now, Verito are conducting an audit into the member induction programme, particularly looking at how we can improve engagement and set future sessions, so the kind of programme itself. They were due to report back in May 24 at the Audit and Governance Committee, but because we're going to Audit and Governance in July 24 to talk about member induction programme and the LGA public interest report, we thought we'd bring them together in July instead of May. So that's it. Thank you very much. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for, it's been a really comprehensive report, and there's some positives in there. I do like the idea of the sessions that you want to continue. So it's very much a case of continuing, training and development. But I open it up to members. Please indicate if you have any questions for Claire. Councillor Lomas.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Claire, for this. One of the things that I noted came in feedback from members, and it was my own feedback that I gave as well, was about the use of Milo. And then separately, so I constantly got confused how to get to the training. So there's ModGov for the programme, and then some links there, and then some links we got by email, and then some of them we had to log into Milo. So is there anything that can be done to kind of streamline that? Because that was confusing, to say the least.
Yeah, no, thank you for that feedback, councillor. Yes, it was. Yes, I recognise that and can see how confusing it was when it was all laid out. So through the audit process, we're looking to see whether we can use just one system rather than the two. I haven't got an answer for that yet because it's probably looking at a bit of development, either Milo or ModGov, but we're hoping to be able to create one platform where all of the information is rather than having to go to different places.
Good, thank you. Councillor Inchman.
Thank you. I do wonder, and we have mentioned this before, Claire, but not when you're here, whether it could be indicated whether certain sessions were suitable for newly elected councillors or newly elected councillors and experienced councillors. I've said before, I didn't go to any sessions here. I went to 9 sessions arranged by the LGA off my own back, because I knew that these weren't appropriate. When you've been on the council 25 years, it's not really surprising. So I think it would be helpful if you could say, in particular, these are suitable for new councillors or new and experienced. That doesn't apply to the mandatory training. If you've got to go to mandatory training, then you just have like planning training. But if you could do that, I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, just supplementary to that, my approach to training all my career, I think, has been that you learn best from peers, and I think it would be a great shame if we ended up in a situation where more experienced councillors didn't go to training alongside their newly elected colleagues, because that would remove the ability to learn from people who have that wealth of experience, and I think that would be a real shame, because I've learned a lot from councillors with more experience than me, and I think that reflecting on the difference between 2019 when I was first elected and there was nothing, and last year when I was re-elected and there was this very comprehensive suite of training offered, there is an element to which I'm sure people will decide which training they prioritise on the basis of what their individual needs are. But I wouldn't want to have a situation where we were kind of almost putting off having more experienced councillors with newly elected councillors. At the very least, newly elected councillors need to get to know the other people on the council.
Please do, yeah.
I think this is the very first time that I can remember when I haven't been invited to come to a session to do exactly what Councillor Lomas says. I've really enjoyed going to training sessions in the past, which are not just run by officers, but are run by officers and members. And I found them immensely beneficial. It enabled me, has enabled me in the past to get to know new members, not only in my own group, but in other groups, which I think is really important. And I regretted the fact that this time there didn't seem the opportunity to do that. And if that could be built in the future, I, for one, you know, I have got a training background. I'd be delighted to come, but, you know, to go and not to just receive passively something which I've been doing for years doesn't appeal to me. To be able to help new members receive any new information, that really does appeal to me.
Good. Thank you, members. Councillor Chambers.
I appreciate that this is aimed at ward councillors. I was wondering whether there might be any mileage in considering, rather than throwing it open, to parish councillors as well. Simply from the fact that A, looking at the list of what's on offer is very inviting. B, it's something that I think a lot of parish councillors would benefit from. And given the weight of the complaints that we look at, it might also be very politic that parish councillors are able to access this type of training. Now, I fully appreciate that there may be obstacles in the sheer numbers involved. But is it something that could at least be looked at?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Councillor Chambers, and one that my colleague and obviously Claire will take that forward. Because I think you're right. I think particularly around standards, I think we'd already ascertained that I think it was 65% of the complaints that we had that came in over a period of time were from parish councillors, about parish councillors, and so some training around that probably would be appropriate. I'm a parish councillor on Dunnington Parish Council, and we discussed this last night. There was a proposal last night to come and do bespoke training with our parish council, which we approved last night. So I know it is in the offing. So I'm just aware that Claire, do you want to come back on that, and then I'll ask my colleagues to comment.
Just all of these sessions, or pretty much all of them, have been recorded. So we already have a library of videos.
Brilliant.
It's more about how we can make that easily available, because as Councillor Lomas noted, it's kind of a bit buried in our systems at the moment. So leave that with me, and hopefully I'll
That's
have
a really good point, Chris. Councillor Runciman and then Councillor Fisher.
I think that the use of video recordings is really advantageous. Parish councillors do have a habit, because I'm a parish councillor too, of saying they can't come. And there isn't a lot of excuse if there's a video there. And whilst you don't get the interactions, as Councillor Lomas has quite rightly said, you might get some input into some of the basic things that cause us on standards a bit of a worry when people don't seem to have grasped ways of behaving. Let's put it like that. Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I'll just reiterate what Councillor Lomas said about the difficulty of accessing the system. I'm a computer Neanderthal. I'm sorry, that's probably root to Neanderthals. I find computers very frustrating, and my swear box was full after trying to do about 5 sessions. I found it very difficult to get to them. I just wonder how we could make that easier for buffoons like me who are not good at computers. The other thing I would say is we've just got to be a little bit careful about training parish councillors, because the YLCA does a very comprehensive suite of training for parish councillors. And if we start to pinch them, it may make some of their courses non-viable. So
Yeah. Okay. And Joe, and then I've got a couple of questions I want to put to
As
Claire.
an outsider, not a councillor, some experience in looking at performance of organisations and involvement in things. I tread gently, but if you have a set of training programmes, it should be very appropriate for councillors to attend, and some councillors are not attending them for good reasons, bad reasons, or anything else. And some councillors are attending, a lot of them. I have to say, from an outsider's perspective, it looks kind of odd. And in other organisations, you would perhaps report on membership of things like that, or you would discuss it in this context with the whips of the parties as to its relevance. And as I say, I recognise this is a very complicated set of quite sensitive issues and all that, but it does look odd.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of points really. Sorry, Councillor Fisher, forgive me, I just should have looked up before I looked there.
Thank you, Chair. Had this been provided in 2019, I would have attended far more sessions because I've learned a lot about this council through trial and error. You know, basically putting my foot in it or just having to pick things up from other councillors during the time I've been on it. I mean, I have a lot of experience. I didn't feel that some of the sessions I need to go to, some were statutory, I go to those, but some I didn't feel the need to go to because I didn't think they were going to teach me anything I didn't know already. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just on that, I mean, there are some groups that are too small to have representation across all of the committees, and therefore it's pointless a group member attending a training for a committee it has no place on. So there's that kind of comes into it as well. So just a couple of things from me, Claire, if I might, and members, please, if you want to come in as well. So the first thing I'd say is it was very easy for my group because we aren't that big, but we had one new member and we had a mentoring scheme. Now I'm pretty sure that other groups have a similar kind of informal scheme where they have a mentor for new councillors that come in, and maybe some recognition around that from the council might be useful. Dare I say that in the mentoring scheme you could have possibly even look at putting political allegiances aside, because in terms of the processes of what councillors do, it shouldn't actually, your political preference shouldn't actually come into it. But that's an aside, and you know, we wait till 2027 or for a by-election before we test that one. The other thing from me is that whilst a member may not have done very much in terms of the training offered by CYC, I know that there are external bodies that were, so for example, you know, I've done safeguarding training, I've done GDPR training, all in my role as a school governor. Notwithstanding that, the LGA provide training courses, the YLCA provide a really good raft of training courses, and local council associations, I've done courses with them. So again, it's how we feed that into, because if you took a snapshot, I mean, thankfully there are no names, but if there were names on this, and we took a snapshot, we thought, well, Councillor B's done nothing. The reality of Councillor B may well have done an awful lot, but we've not been able to feed it in. So it's just how we integrate that. So Claire, you're going to come back to me and then I'll come to Joe.
Yeah, that sounds like almost a training record for councillors. So we can list the data of the sessions that we know they've attended, and then councillors will be required to add their own training on what they've attended themselves.
And I know we had muted in the past that the group whips were to hold some form of kind of training record for their members, and if they do, it would be purely voluntary, but if they do, maybe the members that have done courses and training outside of CYC could feed that into their groups. Councillor Huntsman and then Joel.
A very quick comment about mentoring. I'm a peer mentor for the LGA. It's a role that I take very seriously and enjoy enormously. And I think the role of mentoring, where the mentee can come back to you and say, I've had this to deal with and I don't quite know how to do it. I think that's really important. And it's very different from a session where everybody's there. And if the groups provide mentoring, I think that's an excellent thing to do. And certainly our group does exactly that. Thanks.
Good. Thank you.
Chair, you made the point I was trying to make in my harmless, put my foot in it way, which is the record is not recording the reality, but the outsider looking at it reads the record. And it is appropriate if you're trying to say members are doing more than this record is showing. I find some way of expressing that, because looking at it, it looks like there's a very, very odd situation existing. So if that's not the reality, it'll be helpful if the record in some way better reflected the reality.
Good, thank you. Please do, Councillor Runciman.
I've said this before, Joe, we had one new member in our group. And that's why there are very few Lib Dems. You have one new member out of 3. We had one new member out of 19. So it doesn't reflect the true situation. And it's really good that there were so many Labour people who attended, because that's where the bulk of the new members were.
Yeah.
And that shows you that they're taking the role seriously, which I'm quite sure they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. So just before we thank Claire and send her on her way, just paragraph 14 talks about the programme for the year ahead. But we're also, part of the recommendations, asked to give feedback for any anything in terms of training subjects moving forward. So just for a few moments, members, if you want to look at paragraph 14, are you happy with that list? Are there any omissions that you think we should have? Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, just to note, it's naloxone with an X, not a Z. Thank you.
It's what, sorry?
Naloxone with an X.
All right.
Not nalozone. That might be something else completely.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Chambers. Yeah, okay.
Betray my ignorance. I even had it been nalozone, I was going to ask, what is it?
So it's a public health request that we train and provide information so we don't sorry, Richard. So it's a public health, Director of Public Health request that we update all ward members on naloxone, which is a drug that's spreading like wildfire amongst some of our wards. So it's trying to help.
No. Oh, naloxone is a medication that's given by nasal spray that rescues somebody from an opiate overdose. And it's very safe and it's highly effective and it saves lives. And as councillors are often out doing ward surgeries and work with people in wards, the Director of Public Health wants to both make sure that councillors understand the risks and understand where they can get naloxone if it should be needed, but also that councillors can then volunteer to be trained to administer naloxone should it be required. Because if we can all save one more life by doing that, I think that would be a marvellous thing to do. So half of the story is making sure councillors understand what it is, how it works, who typically has access to it. There was actually this morning a lead story on radio news was about the changes that are being made by government to encourage all workers who are likely to come across people who might have an opiate overdose to be trained so that they can carry and administer naloxone and save lives. So we're delighted to be part of that.
Brilliant. Well done. Thank you, Rowan. Thank you ever so much for that clarification. Councillor Pavic, were you going to say the same thing? Were you? There we go. There we go. There we go. Good. Good. So I just have one area that we may or may not want to look at. So I sit on the one of the scrutiny committees for the combined authority, and it's whether we would need to look at some form of training programme for members that are involved with the combined authority and with the newly elected Labour mayor. Credit where credit's due, councillor. So yeah, so they were my ideas if members are comfortable with that. Okay, thank you. I think we've given that a good area. Claire, thank you so much for what you do. Please do genuinely thank your staff I think as Councillor Lomas commented, in 2019, when we arrived in West Officers, a little bit wet behind the ears. There was very little compared to what we've got now. I remember half a day with a curly sandwich and someone from Democratic Services telling me what to do, and here we are now with a full programme. So commend you and your staff for that, and I look forward to seeing that develop. But thank you for your time, Claire. And hopefully it's been a warm experience. Thank you for that, members. So we're going on to item number 9, which is the review of the council handling procedures for complaints under the Member Code of Conduct. Are you going to speak to that? Yeah.
Thank you,
On
Chair.
page 60, sorry, page 67 of your agenda.
Yeah, so this report is effectively a cover report for previous report which came to the committee in November. Members asked for this to come back to see what progress had been made. Effectively, this is waiting to be considered by the Constitution Working Group. Only full council has the authority to make amendments to the Constitution, and as the process for case handling is part of the Constitution, it is stacked in that queue and must make its way ultimately to full council. One thing that members could consider doing when recommending changes to be made is to extract as much of the non-essential from the Constitution as possible, because what we see in Appendix 29 at the moment is a wealth of guidance. It's not one case handling procedure, it's a case handling procedure plus a FAQs plus a this plus a that. So one of the recommendations that I made in the report to this committee in November was consider substantially reducing it to the essential facets, and also reducing the role that members are playing in the filtering of complaints, because the broad number of complaints which were being caught by, I think it's paragraph 5, meant that there were very many subcommittees sitting. And I noted on the previous occasions that members were in support of retaining the role of the subcommittee for executive members, but not in respect of all the other categories, i.e. chairs, vice chairs, shadow executive. And that is what I noted and was going to present moving forward. In terms of disparity with what other authorities do, when presenting this to Constitution Working Group, as an officer making recommendations, I will point out that there is still, even at a reduced scale, disparity with other authorities in terms of the role of the Standards Committee and the role of the monitoring officer. There are authorities where the monitoring officer takes a more significant role and takes on all or nearly all of the filtering, with really only hearings being dealt with, and that could be dealt with actually at a combined Audit and Governance Standards Committee. So I'm not going to, put forward a report saying absolutely abolish the Standards Committee, but members have to be aware that that when looking at the revisions to these procedures, full council will be doing that against a backdrop of where can we make savings, how can we use our resources efficiently. So we have to be very careful in terms of the recommendations that are made are balanced against that need for openness, transparency, peer judgment being used to its best effect, but also against the most efficient use of resource. So it's open for members to make further comments, change the comments they made last time, and then ultimately this will go onwards through the steps. And whether we can ask the Constitution Working Group to look at this earlier rather than later, indicate a level of urgency, something like that. There is no work programme set, as I understand it, and no democratic support for the Constitution Working Group. So it is malleable in terms of what's placed on the agenda next, and the council procedure rules have been and gone and are ready, I think. So there is a slot perhaps available.
Good. Okay, I'm going to open it up. Councillor Runciman.
I just want to ask Francis, if this is pulled out of the Constitution, will that make it easier to change should we have to? I can see the time-consuming nature of putting it through full council, and I can also see why you would put it out as guidance. But would that make it easier to change it if we have to, or does it always have to go back to full council? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, through you, Chair. If it's not part of the constitution, it can be changed more readily.
Okay. Any other comments? No, I mean, it's a fulsome report, but I think it does reflect the comments that we made previously, and some of the changes which I think are for good. I remember back in 2019, 2020, where it was felt that the standards process wasn't transparent enough and wasn't robust enough, and I think in trying to change that, we maybe changed it kind of too much, and I think we probably found a more balanced way forward. So I'm really convinced. Thank you, Francis, for the work that you have done on this. Again, my only, whilst I would be comfortable in principle it falling outside of the constitution, my slight worry and concern is that if it does, because I think having a standards committee is really important. Having served on it for the last 6 years, I think it's a really important committee. I think we do an excellent job, not just for City of York councillors, but also for the parish councillors. And I've already mentioned that, you know, almost 60% of the complaints that come through our parish council complaints. So not having this committee, I'm slightly concerned about. If it wasn't within the constitution, it would be easy not only to change it, but actually it would be easy to kind of sweep it aside if that was ever someone's intention. My other frustration, which again, you members, you know this, my frustration is that you know, it in a sense it's almost a bit of a toothless committee in terms of sanction, and I think if we accept the severity of a committee like this, then I think we do need to have you know, far more robust sanctions in place, and that's something that, you know, I have fed that up the chain through to central government, and I know that, you know, in future that will also be kind of fed up the chain. I think, you know, that we should have the ability to impose much more robust sanctions. I'm not suggesting that we go for a recall petition, but I, you know, to be able to remove somebody from the chamber for a period of time, I think is a sanction that we should have and we don't have. So that said, I'm happy to accept the recommendations from Francis. Thank you for the report. Members, are you? Oh, forgive me. Sorry, Councillor, I thought we had, but if you have something else to say, please do. Please do.
I want to say, going on to page 107 now, I'm pleased to see an acknowledgement that people might be digitally excluded. I'm always worried when they say fill in a form online. You know,
Those council officials.
Yes, if the person hasn't got the facilities to do that or the ability to be able to do it. And I was glad to see that was acknowledged in there, that's a really important point. I was also glad to see on page 111 that the chair of JSC has been taken away, as it were, from the informal resolution. I think that is too onerous. It should be an officer, a non-political officer, and I was pleased to see that had gone. And other than that, I won't go on at any length because I think that the changes, the taking out of the duplication, the whole, you know, it's great fun revising a constitution, she says. That is exactly what needed to happen here, and it has, and I'm grateful to officers for doing it. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Huntsman. Anybody else got any comments that they wish to make? Councillor Pavlovic.
So Francis, I'm interested in you pointing out to me, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do, that we remain anomalous in some respects in having a separate Joint Standards Committee. When you looked at comparator councils and authorities, what was the rationale behind incorporating it within, for example, the audit and governance or the audit committees, as opposed to having it separate? Is it the fact that there is such a significant lack of sanction that was one of their drivers?
Through you, Chair, I'm not going to claim to have inquired why other councils had either reduced the role of the Joint Standards Committee or had amalgamated it with another. I think the suggestions that you have just made, Councillor, as to what the reasons may have been are exactly the same assumptions as I am making. It's a resource issue, it's to do with proportionality. So the Chair has just made the point, well, it would be great if we could do something more robust, but we can't, and therefore is it proportionate to use the resource to do the non-robust things? I think also the statutory requirements, do we pare it down to what we are legally required to do? So we know that there are certain parts of a case handling procedure which must involve the role of an IP, but save for the minimum requirements set out in the legislation, there is a great deal of flexibility for councils to choose where it pitches its standards interventions, and I am sure that you are right in saying that resource availability of robust sanctions have played into decision making in other authorities.
Joe.
I think, Francis, you could describe it in a more positive way and say standards are actually an aspect of governance. So you can justify linking the two together because, you know, poor standards would be an example of poor governance, and therefore they are highly related to one another.
Yeah, Councillor Runciman.
I think having a standards committee is important because it's not a political committee, despite the comments about that. It's not the same as a scrutiny committee. It's not the same as any other committee that we have. It's entirely apolitical. And of course, its findings are published. And that actually is a sanction in itself. And we haven't got a lot more. We used to have, when I chaired it, much more that we could do. But I think we have to work within the framework that we've got. But I would strongly say that we should keep it and keep it as apolitical and across all the parties as we possibly can.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
To add, I would strongly believe that audit and governance should be apolitical in its working, because proper governance is not a political issue. And therefore, I would have I wouldn't have the kind of reservations you're expressing, with audit and governance being more directly involved in it. If audit and governance performs as a cross-organisational function, where the members work in relation to the audit and the governance of the organisation.
Yeah, and that's on your wish list, Joe. It's way above our pay grade to change that. I'm just mindful of the fact that, forgive me, does anybody else have any comments before I kind of draw this section to a close? And forgive me for being a bit too eager there, Councillor Runciman. I'm just mindful of a couple of things. So the timescales for this, I know from experience that when something goes to full council, it's usually tagged on the end and we just nod it through. I don't think anybody reads the constitutional changes on the night. I think somebody read them beforehand, and they do tend to get nodded through. So I think it's really important that we make sure that what we're proposing as changes is seen by either A&G or the Constitutional Review Committee. Whichever of those committees is going to get it to full council the quickest. I think it's probably going to be the Constitutional Review, would it be?
That's the route. It's not a committee.
Good. Councillor, must forgive me.
It's a working group of audit and governance.
Right.
So the route will be for them to consider it and then it will go to Audit and Governance Committee
Right.
before arriving
At full
at
council.
full council. So,
Right,
yeah.
I'm just thinking of how we can expedite this in terms of getting it through to full council as quickly as we can. Because at the moment, it is what it is, and we haven't changed anything yet. So if we are going to try and streamline, and there's going to be cost savings in doing that, because clearly if we're not going to have a subcommittee hearing for a shadow member, then that's going to be a cost saving. So it's in everybody's interest to get this through to full council as quickly as we can. So, you know, I recommend that we move this forward and get it to the working group first, and then is that, thank you, members, thank you. So can I just have a confirmation we're happy with that route? Lovely, thank you very much. We could be on for the longest joint standards meeting since 2023, I think. Coming on to the next agenda item, which is the work plan. So we've had a good lengthy agenda this evening. Our next meeting is on the 23rd of July. And at the moment, we've just got the standard items on there. I guess if it wouldn't have to be an onerous item, but if we could just have an update as to where we are with the item we've just looked at. So just simple kind of update feedback on that would be really helpful. Does any member have any issues that they think that we should have on the next agenda? I think no, that's fine. So if we can just have that on the next meeting, that would be helpful. Which then brings us to our next agenda item. Yes. Well, Councillor Fisher, we're going to look at the redacted first and then the unredacted. It's entirely up to you whether you want to go now or. Okay. Thank you for your time. So item number 11, which is the monetary offers report. So we do have, as always is the case, we have the redacted list, which is in the public domain, and then we have the confidential list, which we will look at in private in a moment. But just, Francis, if you'd like to talk us through the open complaints that's currently in the public domain. Well, and obviously the open complaints, if it's the report in total. So.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of the open complaints, in fact, talking through them is very quick to do because there's little more I can say than is contained in the log. Perhaps just a general remark that the cases are staying at a reasonable level. We're not seeing any spikes. We're not seeing any big trends growing. So from an overall monitoring perspective, we're steady, we're getting through the cases, and there are no indications from the complaints received that there are significant issues that would concern the committee on a pervasive level.
And then the recently closed log. Anything on there that you need to?
Chair, I think it's been, it's noted in the minutes that you've approved that a hearing took place, a double hearing or two hearings in one day took place, and that's the most significant closure that's featured on the list.
Good. Okay. Do any members have any questions in the public section of this item? Nope. Okay, so we are going to, in a moment, go into a private session. For those that have been watching either live or on catch up, thank you for your time. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. We will be going to have a closed session in a moment, and we will not be coming back. So if you are watching, this will be the end of the live broadcast. Thank you for your time.